We've all been there. It's long after midnight, and you're one of the few people still awake in your part of the world. Maybe you hear the distant noises of city nightlife, or perhaps it's just crickets and trees swaying in the wind where you are. Either way, it's a kind of reassuring solitude. The world feels like it's on pause. As a longtime horror fan and now horror creator, this time of night is when I feel the most awake and the most curious. Many times, I'd fall into some kind of rabbit hole or find something so truly and hellaciously original that I'd stay awake almost the rest of the night to learn more about it. During my years of late-night searching, I kept running into a name in older, more obscure corners of the internet. A name that suggested a deeply unsettling premise to the content that was about to follow before you ever even saw what came next. The noise coming from inside children. What exactly is this? The mystery begins with a blog post in 2010 titled, "Who is Ed Can?" The post opens with, "Here we go. I searched for this thing for weeks because I knew I had it, gave up, but just tried again and found it after only about half an hour." After that was a review for a story titled, "The Noises Coming from Inside Children." I'm showing the full text, but I'll read highlighted excerpts. After much hesitation, consideration, and outright deliberation, I am going to give this work a negative review. I heard about this story through someone else's complaining of it. I started the story with the intention of giving it a positive review. But I cannot give The Noises Coming from Inside Children a good review, because I hated it. I hated the entire experience of reading it. And only through some strange combination of obsession and masochism did I finish it. It is a shame so few people will actually finish this story. I suspect I am one of only a very few who actually did. This is because it was so desperately difficult to finish. If more people read The Noises Coming from Inside Children, then the genre of horror would be reserved solely for it alone, and no one would ever claim to be a fan of it. The first thing I noticed was that the review called the story "The Noises," plural, "coming from inside children," while every other source I saw, articles, blogs, forum posts, called it "The Noise," singular, "coming from inside children." Even the blog, Who is Ed Can, quoting this review, uses the singular form, so in this video I'll do the same. I acknowledge the difference, but I'm assuming it's a typo in transcription. This blog also happens to be the first recorded instance of this alleged story's existence, and it doesn't provide any photo evidence, like the so-called magazine that the review was written in. Furthermore, if you search Ed Can, or The Noise Coming from Inside Children, plural or singular, the top results are always this blog, or other articles about finding the story and its author, which also usually cite this blog. Finally, even though it's a book review in a written publication, it doesn't actually mention anything about plot points, characters, or anything about the story. I've seen my fair share of book reviews, and almost all of them include at least something to reference that the reviewer actually read the story. I don't know if this is something that they have to do, but not doing it and just bashing the book does strike me as a bit unprofessional. So let's be real. This mystery is almost definitely fake. There are so many red flags. But if you're a naturally curious type like me, then you'll also appreciate getting into a neat little rabbit hole that isn't so well known. The blog only has 4 posts, each of them making claims about the existence of Ed Can and the noise coming from inside children while continuing to provide zero evidence. After reading the rest of the blog, I learned that the blog author, by the way, I'm just gonna call the blog author OP, original poster, because I'm also going to refer to Ed Can as an author, and that's going to get confusing. So, the OP claimed to have first seen the name Ed Can when they were around 8 to 10 years old at their local library. There was a flyer with a list of horror authors and their works, one of which was titled In Concrete Basements, a title that stuck with them because of how much it intrigued them. A few years later, when they claimed to be in 7th grade, so about 12 to 13 years old, they picked up a magazine titled something along the lines of Seattle Regional Horror Quarterly, and found an article about Ed Can's recently released work, The Noise Coming from Inside Children. While reading it over, OP learned that Ed Can was the author of In Concrete Basements, which they had seen on the poster years earlier. In that article, Ed Can was referred to as an up-and-coming author who exploded onto the horror scene. The Noise Coming from Inside Children wasn't included in that magazine due to its numerous appearances in various publications. In the blog's final post, the OP claimed that a bookstore owner they were in touch with had found a copy of a magazine that the story was published in, and that they had shipped it to them. They were expecting it to arrive within a few days and said that they were optimistic. And that was the last post ever on that blog. OP also mentioned using Wikipedia at the age of 21, specifically to look up President Bill Clinton. Wikipedia launched in January 2001, and the page on Clinton wasn't published until October of that same year, meaning that the earliest that OP could have been born was October 1980. If they first saw In Concrete Basements when they were between 8 and 10, and saw The Noise Coming from Inside Children when they were between 12 and 13, when the story was considered recently released, then that puts Ed Can's rise to fame between 1989 and 1994. With the internet being opened to the public in 1991 and gaining major traction by 1993, I find it really hard to believe that an author who was up and coming around that time wouldn't have been talked about even a little. It also makes no sense that next to nobody remembered him when people tried to track him down about 20 years later. Horror is a generally popular genre. The late 80s and early 90s wasn't a golden age of horror fiction like the 60s were, but authors like Stephen King and Anne Rice were still busy putting out plenty of spooky stories. And that's just the written works, don't get me started on the movies. My point is, there's no reason why this one blog should be the top result for the name Ed Can and the title, The Noise Coming from Inside Children. The only two exceptions I can think of, Ed Can was an amateur writer who was known strictly in the local sphere and never grew beyond that, and that all the praise the OP read about was simply small-town hype. The second exception could be that Ed Can was a very early pen name for a horror author who quickly ditched that. If that was the case, there still should have been results for The Noise Coming from Inside Children and In Concrete Basements. There was also an email address on the blog for any readers to send evidence they might come across. I won't disclose it, but it was related to Ed Can's name, and it misspelled his first name by having 2 Ds instead of 1. I don't know if that was intentional or accidental, but I ran it through a few email address verifiers and learned that that mailbox did not exist. The address with the correct spelling of the name did. I sent a note to both addresses, but didn't hear back, and I honestly don't expect to. If I ever do though, I'll make an update post or video. The final part of this mystery involved an RPG titled The Secret of Evermore, released by Nintendo in 1995. Another very suspicious blog titled Rainwood Works, with exactly one post made in September 2010, claimed that a then 22-year-old author named Ed Can joined the game's development team as a writer at some point before July 1995. In July 1995, Can had left the team for unknown reasons, though it's implied that it was because of creative differences, with Can being a horror author and the game being rated E, or at the time, K2A, kids to adults. Allegedly, there are bits of concept art scattered around the web, supporting a theory that the game was originally meant to have a much darker storyline than what was released, possibly even being a horror game. This part is definitely false. A Redditor made a post on the gaming subreddit in September 2010, linking the Rainwood Works blog post, thinking that Evermore was originally meant to be a horror game. One of the responses was by someone claiming to be the lead programmer of Evermore, who said that he was the first person hired for that development team and that there was never anybody named Ed Can hired to be on the team. There's no evidence that this person is who they say they are either, but they did seem to be pretty active on game dev subreddits. A comment on the Rainwood Works blog post basically said the same thing, so to me this looks like an early attempt at an ARG, an alternate reality game. For those who don't know, ARGs tell a fictional narrative through real-world platforms like blog posts, social media accounts, or even YouTube videos. There's usually some puzzle-solving aspect involved for people who wanted to play the game. So with this in mind, I tried to see if there was anything hidden in the site itself. The blog was hosted on Blogspot, and a breadcrumb widget on the sidebar showed that there were 4 posts all published in November of 2010. But what if there were posts that weren't shown there? Maybe there was a hidden page that revealed the next puzzle if it was an ARG. That wasn't the case either. I crawled the blog and confirmed that the only posts on this blog were the 4 publicly available ones. I also went into developer tools and did a twice and thrice over of the written text for anything peculiar. Nothing that I noticed. So, I guess this is the end of it. But what was this ARG trying to accomplish? The books don't seem to exist. The only rational explanation I can think of is that it was a marketing campaign for Secret of Evermore, 15 years after the game released. But hey, I've seen stranger things. But you know what? I'm gonna give OP the benefit of the doubt, just so I get to spend a little bit more time with you, my viewer. Let's assume the blog was actually made in a good faith attempt to find a horror story from the OP's childhood. If that was the case, and given that we've yet to see any evidence of the noise coming from inside children, in concrete basements, and Ed Can's existence, what if the OP is misremembering? Or what if it was a product of a really vivid dream that blurred the line between memory and imagination? Could that have been the case? Some of you might be familiar with the Evil Farming Game. In 2016, a Redditor made a post on r/tipofmyjoystick, a community about finding video games whose names you couldn't remember. They asked if anyone knew about a violent farming game similar to Harvest Moon. The premise of the game was that the player killed their wife, and the gameplay loop revolved around maintaining the farm and moving her dead body to different places to hide it from the police and townsfolk who visited. The post went viral, leading to a years-long search that spanned the internet. Coverage by well-known creators like Nexpo and Wang only added to how quickly this mystery achieved cult status. However, the mystery was solved in 2021, when a 2015 livestream by Varg Skeletor Joel surfaced. In that livestream, while playing the game Global Defense Force, Joel suggested that exact premise as an idea for a video game. The Evil Farming Game did not exist at all. The OP of the Tip of My Joystick post later confirmed that they did misremember the livestream and thought that the idea was in fact a real video game. So could the OP of the Who is Ed Can blog have misremembered an actual book title for one that didn't exist? I really didn't have much to work with, so I did a search with what little scraps of information I had. After some research, I only found one possibility that didn't feel like it was a reach. Author Ted Klein was a lesser-known but highly praised horror author in the 70s and 80s. TED being an acronym for Theodore Ebon Donald. TED was appropriately spelled like an acronym, so T.E.D. OP never mentioned if the magazines were new, or if they were in good condition, but a bit of wear and tear, and maybe some wrinkles, could have cut off the T in the author's name, while the last name Klein looks suspiciously similar to Can. Furthermore, one of Klein's publications is a novella titled Children of the Kingdom, first published in 1975, and was later published in an anthology titled Dark Forces in 1980, which included the works of other authors. It was again sold as part of another anthology titled Dark Gods in 1985. Klein has very few published works, but all of his stories have received high praise. In 2001, one critic said, quote, "In close to 25 years of writing, Klein has only 2 books and a handful of scattered tales to his credit. And yet his achievement towers gigantically over that of his more prolific contemporaries." A notable review for Children of the Kingdom, published in the New York Times Book Review, described it as, quote, "the greatest New York City horror story of all time." Now, there are a few holes with this theory. Klein lived and rose to fame in New York City, so it's unlikely that a regional publication in Seattle would have featured his works. Not impossible, though. Another contradiction is that Klein doesn't have any published works titled anything along the lines of In Concrete Basements. I looked through what I could find of the anthology series that his works were published in hopes of finding maybe another author's works that was titled or titled similarly to In Concrete Basements, but this was a dead end. So I'm going to chalk this whole thing up as, 95% it's an ARG, and 5% that OP was misremembering on a grand scale and accidentally created a mystery. And if it was an ARG, I wish there had been more to the story because it's a genuinely interesting premise. I also came across a story on r/nosleep mentioning the noise coming from inside children and Ed Can. But this was definitely a fictional work, because No Sleep publishes fictional stories. It was an entertaining read, so I recommend it. Now, for a mystery with a far more macabre ending, check out my deep dive into the fate of Iranian filmmaker Babak Khorramdin. Thank you for watching.